What's a movie with a great premise but a terrible execution? Once a quarter I text the same friend, dang, I wish they made a Jumper sequel. It was one of those movies made at the time when everyone was so desperate for a franchise that could appeal to teens and adults that the first movie focused so hard on being the first in a trilogy that it forgot to be fun. The plans for the trilogy sounded awesome. I Am Number 4 did the same thing. My friend and I have talked at length about it, and have basically landed on not understanding why someone wouldn't just adapt the second book. You get a nice couple little vignettes that establish there are different worlds and ways to go between. You establish there is this guy named Roland and he is some kind of semi-mystical badass. You get some action up front with Eddie's story and the gunfight. You get some mystery and probably some comedy with Susanna. You get the resolution of Adetta's injury with the pusher. Then you get another fight with the Detta character where you see how the various training has benefited the characters. You end with the resolution of Susanna, the formation of a solid trio and the sense that more might be to come, but also a solid and satisfying ending with storylines wrapped up. So a good duality of resolution and curious hopefulness for leaving neither cliffhangers to be unresolved, or finality that is hard to continue. It would have been a really good grounding to test out if enough people were interested in a 3 or 4-part series, or moving it over to a streaming service for a couple limited series or whatever. The way I always describe that piece of shit is this: they took books 1, 3, and 7. They then filtered out any part that had anything to do with Susanna and Eddie. They then took the remaining pages and fed them through a shredder. They then laid out the shredder clippings on a carpet, painted a wall with adhesive, and grabbed an at-home rotating fan. They turned on the fan and pointed it at the shredded up pieces of paper on the ground. The fan would blow pieces of paper in the air and at the wall. Whatever stuck to the wall is the script they filmed. I wanted to like this movie so much. I love Idris Elba as an actor and had no problems with his casting as Roland. His dynamic with Jake is one of my favorite aspects of the first book. There's a line, really early in the movie, where Jake says something like, "You're a gunslinger," and Roland says, "There are no more gunslingers," and I just turned the movie off. I understood that this was another reiteration, but I could not conceive of a version of Roland Deskhine who forgets the face of his father and denies that fact that as long as he is alive, he is a gunslinger and has a duty to fulfill, and he carries all the names of those he lost on the journey, so the gunslingers are alive as long as he is alive. I get it was a throwaway line, but it just sat wrong with me. The thing is, there's a deleted scene of Artemis getting his hands on the fairy book that sorta accurately reflects how he did it in the book, poisoning the old drunk fairy and blackmailing her with the antidote. But they removed it, I assume 'cause it portrayed Artemis in a bad light. For those not in the know, Artemis Fowl was the villain in the first book and he didn't become friends with Holly till like the 3rd or 4th book. That's how bad they fucked the movie. Percy Jackson would have been an easy movie to get right. It's Harry Potter but with American summer campers. Pick that money up off the ground. But Artemis Fowl was an impossible premise to execute. Artemis Fowl is a story about a supervillainous 12-year-old genius, fighting fairy cops, to save his mom. And it is played completely straight. The book works because the kid reading it can make Artemis cool in the head. In the safe, secluded zone of a young adult's imagination, all kinds of stupid things can seem cool. But when you put it up on the silver screen, nobody can make that cool. They could have played it off as a kitschy comedy, like the way the Marvel movies do it. But then it would have been a completely different story, and the fans would have been furious anyway. Was that a hint of a reference to Mallrats? Doesn't matter, It can't happen. It's impossible. Lois could never have Superman's baby. Do you think her fallopian tubes can handle the sperm? I guarantee he blows a load like a shotgun right through her back. What about her womb? Do you think it's strong enough to carry his child? He's an alien, for Christ's sake. His Kryptonian biological makeup is enhanced by Earth's yellow sun. If Lois gets a 10, the kid could kick right through her stomach. Only someone like Wonder Woman has a strong enough uterus to carry his kid. The only way he could bang regular chicks is with a kryptonite condom. That would kill him. Actually, Kevin stated on a podcast this was his own retelling of that essay. Also fun to note this dumb scene in Mallet's got Miramax, who at the time had the rights to Superman, to hire Kevin as a consultant for their planned film, where he would meet John Peters, who got his start in Hollywood being Barbra Streisand hairstylist. Peters would consistently insist on putting giant spiders in his movies and even wanted one in the Never Going to Be Superman Miramax film. Funny enough, he got his giant spider in Wild Wild West, and honestly it's the only reason I remember that movie, so he must be onto something with the giant spider thing. Superhero is alcoholic and misanthropic but tries to help anyway, causes collateral damage when he stops crime. People hate him for it. One day, he saves a struggling PR expert's life from an asshole who hates the PR guy, who promises to pay him back by improving his image. New suit and everything, but he has to go to prison. He refuses, but eventually relents, goes to prison, flies out to collect a basketball that bounced out, flies back in to finish his sentence. After a while, crime rates go back up, superhero goes to save the day, but the asshole from before has now plotted to frame the PR guy and the hero, but the hero stops crimes, stops him, and stops his reputation being destroyed from being framed, and is welcomed by the community as a hero. Easy peasy. You don't have to be Vince Gilligan to realize sticking a sudden twist with an immortal being's kook angle would make things much worse. That's the thing, the first half is an amazing man vs self kind of story, with a side of man vs society, though that largely comes out of his own mistakes. The second half tries to move into a man vs man superhero story, and it blows. I'd rather have had more time with him exploring how to reintegrate into society. He started a journey, it doesn't mean he finished it. Hell, him having to testify against the people he put away would have been a great scene, as he tries to control himself in a courtroom, while they try to bait him. My immediate and lasting impression of that movie is that, somewhere, there's an excellent book it is based upon that I just haven't read. It felt like an adaptation of something that doesn't exist, as if the key moments and plot threads of the novel are just being referenced in the movie and thus lost their impact. Water having memory, an old war, a trapped civilization, the history of Arundel, the mysteries and depths of Elsa's powers, the elemental spirits. There's so much crying out for exposition that we never get and that the movie just expects you to know somehow. It's how I'd imagine the later Harry Potter movies would feel like to someone who hasn't read the books. It's maddening. Frozen 2 was still fun, but goddammit, even talking about it reminded me how much I want the 600-page source novel that does not exist instead. The scene at the end with Elsa freezing the rushing water still pisses me off. Imagine instead of making a giant wall of ice with a simple hand wave, she's really struggling, pushing everything she's got into trying to stop the water, and it's not working. She refuses to quit until Anna tells her to just let it go. She stops, Nock carries them both to safety, Arundel is destroyed, but that's fine because all the people are safe on the cliffs. The two newly reunited groups work together and build a new, better kingdom, where they both live in harmony. The entire theme of the movie was about growing up. There could have been a scene of the castle and everything in it being swept away. Paintings of their parents, their grandfather, all the old things washed clean, to start fresh. It would have tied up the whole theme. Allegedly this was the original idea, sort of. The problem was that instead of the Nook carrying her to safety, Elsa died. This didn't sit well with the kids, for obvious reasons, and the higher-ups at Disney also went sorry. What, you want to kill off the most popular character in the Disney princess line? No. Then the writing team was going to go with something like your idea, where Elsa survives, but then another higher-up at Disney said, guys, we just sunk millions into making R&L World at Disney Tokyo, you can't destroy it? So, yeah. Had to ditch the entire finale and revamp it without any of the themes of loss, overcoming darkness, or moving on in life. So Deus Ex Elsa to the rescue. The problem was that instead of the Nook carrying her to safety, Elsa died. I totally thought that at the end when Anna saw her on the coast for the first time and ran up to hug her, she'd go right through her. She looked a bit transparent and I thought she came back as the literal fifth spirit. They could have had their cake and ate it too if they went that way. Elsa dies, but not really. Olaf's death was fantastic too. It's a shame they walked that back as well, though they did foreshadow saving him with water has memory, so I begrudgingly give them a pass on that one. My question is, where does the time come from? Every single person is supposedly burning 1 second per second of this world's currency just to stay alive, and it's not like a normal currency that is simply transferred to another person. Literal years are taken out of circulation every day. Is there some Federal Reserve of time? Or is time only introduced when a new person enters the system, meaning all the people in this world are essentially vampires? Also, why is it so easy to rob someone of their time? Since the premise is that this life currency is tech-based, couldn't they at least put a fucking pin on that shit so some nerd can't just sneak up on you while you're sleeping and casually steal a century? Edit. Also, why is the resolution of the movie that they rob some rich guy who has 1,000,000 years and distribute that among the poor? If there's 1,000,000 people in the city, that buys them 1 year each. If the premise is that we have the tech to keep everyone alive but we instituted this time currency bullshit to control population, then why isn't the resolution some reworking of the Edit. Also, why is the resolution of the movie that they rob some rich guy who has 1,000,000 years and distribute that among the poor? If there's 1,000,000 people in the city, that buys them 1 year each. If the premise is that we have the tech to keep everyone alive but we instituted this time currency bullshit to control population, then why isn't the resolution some reworking of the system to be more fair, instead of just robbing one rich guy? IIRC, doesn't the villain ask them what their goal is? He points out that the time they distribute will just be gone eventually, and their response is, yeah, I guess, but we're gonna do it anyway. Imagine if it was a horror movie where everyone gets shrunk down and get to live in one of those many communities, but one day/night one of the security guards/psycho hijack the security systems and remove safety netting, allowing wildlife to starting killing off the community. Birds, spiders, ants, etc., all wreaking havoc while they try to get word to the outside. Bonus points for a twist ending where it turns out it was all planned and televised/streamed. A reviewer I saw on the internet loved it because it was like a self-help book in movie form. And that's exactly why I hated the movie. It was so on the nose and syrupy. You're special because you are. You don't have to do or say anything special, you're just special. Look, this kid is special because he draws on paper at school. That's not a normal kid thing, right? I didn't want Oprah telling me to love myself. I didn't want to watch a kid try to balance on one foot for half an hour as some dragged out allegory for balancing yourself. I wanted a fantastical worlds-wide allegory for good and evil and how logic is important but love wins all. I wanted Meg shouting at her father and stubbornly staying behind. I wanted Charles Wallace to actually be silent. I wanted the witches to actually be quirky and odd. I wanted the creepy pulsing brain rhythm torturing the boy with the ball. How do you mess it up so badly? Ezio's storyline was made for the big screen. Spend the first 10 minutes getting us attached to his fiancée and his family, especially his brother. His dad is around long enough to tell Ezio about his birthright as an assassin, then gets killed with the brother. Ezio assassinates the executioner, messily, and then is found by an assassin master who trains him for years. He dedicates his life to revenge for his parents and furthering the assassins, abandoning his old life and his fiancée. Years later, he finds out she's getting married and comes to her and tells her he wishes things could have been different. The climax is him carrying out the assassination of the Borgias, finding out that he's been guided by a sci-fi power from the start, and leave the door open for a sequel. The Chronicles of Narnia Prince Caspian, as well as Voyage of the Dawn Treader. The books the films were based off of were fantastic fantasy stories. Brilliant and exciting and great for all ages. But Caspian and Dawn Treader was a perfect example of not sticking to the original material. They were poorly written and relapsed the character development so many times. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe was the exact opposite. It stuck to the book, stayed true to the characters and put heart and soul into the production. It was a shame to see the Narnia story ripped apart just to have two bad movies. Let's be frank here. The source material of those two books makes it hard. Prince Caspian is told in a series of flashbacks, and it's very political. The premise is much like Hamlet, only the prince escapes the machinations of the court and can act completely outside them. Then he joins up with the talking animals of Narnia and calls in the fabled kings and queens of Narnia from the past, which because of Lewis time-scaling hijinks, are only a year following the events of LLW. And since it's told in the framing story of the Pevensies entering the world and getting caught up, you'd wind up having a lot of exposition dialogue that doesn't move things forward. So you have to restructure the whole movie, and that means that Caspian's story has to carry more weight. And since it's for children, without the in-story narrator explaining the politics along the way, you have to show it in a way they'll understand, which means more original story to explain it. Don't ask me how they managed to actually screw up the parts of the story that came from the book. The whole final clash between the Narnians and the Telmarines was just poorly explained in the movie. As for Dawn Treader, it was mostly a series of vignettes in book form. Like bedtime stories on a single theme. The Search for Lost Lords was just one of those, but the movie used that to tie them all together and it simply wasn't strong enough. Honestly, DT had far more potential if they had found a more original story to tie things together, and I honestly love the visuals a lot more than I did in PC. More than one take I've heard is that instead of it being a romance, play it as a horror movie. It already has the makings of one until all the cutesy stuff starts happening that's supposed to be seen as sweet. All you need to do is change the tone, have Lawrence's character be mortified, and lean the climax in a more tense, thriller-filled direction. Hell, maybe even after killing off Pratt's character in this theoretical version, have Lawrence's character start to go through the same madness that Pratt's did, and have the movie end on her looking over a capsule of another crewmate. Instead, we just have this tone-deaf mess of a movie that ignores the implications of its premise, and I find that deeply saddening. Funny enough, it's based off a screenplay with the waking up and no one else knows the Beatles premise, and it goes super differently and much more realistic. The problem with yesterday is that so much would have literally changed in the world, and yet it's just thrown away as oh, the Beatles didn't exist. Guess there's no Oasis Hiwiway. The entire music industry would be incredibly different. From the success of rock bands, pre-Beatles it was really only the Crickets and the Beach Boys that were household names, and even for the latter, their groundbreaking music was as a result of the Beatles. The people who made the movie straight up ignored both what the music industry was like in 1963, and whether there was someone who took the Beatles' place, Rolling Stones. Gary and the Pacemakers? Dave Clark 5, that hit it big for maybe a year or two, before dropping for the next big fad.